That made my month, Eric. Thank you for arranging this.
Sure,
It
Matt.
was a lot of fun.
And I'm not kidding when I say you are a great interviewer, and
Thank you.
You do your homework. I appreciate that.
And no notes, by the way, guys.
I
no
noticed.
notes.
I noticed. Believe me, I've done 9,000 of these things, and that was a good one. Well done.
Hey, this is Eric Dorr from the Gettysburg Museum of History. This interview is pretty amazing to me also because we've probably heard, or at least as fans have heard, a lot of interviews that has to do with his movie roles and his contributions to film and the series Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan and Platoon. But this particular interview is really amazing. He talks about his military service, and there's not a whole lot of that out there. And I learned several things that I didn't know about him. It was absolutely an incredible interview. But I wanted to let you know that he also has come on board with the Gettysburg Museum of History in the capacity of our board of directors. So he's going to be assisting us as we develop the new exhibits over at the new building. And we're going to build a world-class Easy Company Band of Brothers exhibit. And I can't think of anyone better to direct us in this endeavor than Captain Dale Dye. So we give you Captain Dale Dye.
Addressing Gettysburg.
Okay, rolling.
So I got to tell you, I admire your gumption just going out to Hollywood and figuring out a way to make that work. Because my friends and I, when Private Ryan came out, what year was that, 97?
Yeah,
Something
97,
like
yeah.
We were 19, I think. Yeah, 19. And we saw, the previews for it, and we're like, oh yeah, let's go see World War II movie. We're all gung-ho about it and everything. And when it was over, we went to a diner to get coffee, and 4 of us were there. And 2 of them were these big jock types, the real tough guys.
Sure.
And everything. No one could speak for a half an hour because they were ready to cry. And I remember that was the first, I don't know if it was the first movie I saw with surround sound, but it was the first one I saw that really made good use of it.
Yeah.
And the sound of a bullet whizzing past my ear and hitting a piece of metal or dirt or someone's head, and that cold, just it means business, and it does what it does sound.
Yeah.
I swear to God, I can't watch that movie but once a year, if that, because it's so realistic.
Well, you have to credit Steven Spielberg for that. He's a huge believer in sound.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were through with the film, we shot the initial sequence in a beach called Curracloe in southwest Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And he called me when we got home. He said, thank you very much for everything, but I still need you. And I said, well, what's up? And he said, we're really going to juice the sound. And I said, that's good news. Now what?
Yeah.
And what we did was we went to a range up in the Bay Area, and we arranged microphones downrange, and then I locked up a machine gun so that the mics would pick up the Doppler effect of a round going by. When you hear it close, you know when it's close.
Right.
And then I went out and bought a side of beef, and we hung up a side of beef on the range. And we used a suppressed MP5 with subsonic ammo, and I fired into that beef, and we hit the meat, and then we hit the bone, and it was mic'd in there, so you got all the sound. And then we put up some angle iron, and I fired at that, and you got the ricochet effect. So I knew it was going to be wonderful when he cut it in.
And it's and then obviously it was used again in Band of Brothers, and everybody's copied it since then.
Yeah.
And it's I'm a big sound guy too. I love sound, and actually we're talking with somebody to go to a range and take Civil War weapons to get that exact thing. And I went to a range down in Virginia 2 years ago, and they let me set my microphones up. I must have seen a behind the scenes featurette or something like that about how they did that, because I knew in my head how to do it, but I don't know how. I took it down to get the sound of Civil War artillery rounds, because we were live firing artillery. And that was really cool. But again, it was chilling, because it just comes in and it thwaps against whatever it hits, and it doesn't care what's in the way. It just goes through whatever. And
you know, I've watched a lot of Civil War, Revolutionary War stuff where they use flintlock weapons.
Yeah.
And it always upsets me, because I've fired a lot of flintlock weapons, and you hear the snap before you hear on the frizzen. The frizzen ignites, and there goes the round. But you never hear that. You know, the sound guys don't get it. So
I think didn't the Patriot get that?
I don't know. I can't remember.
I feel like one of them is the first time I noticed that, where you hear
snap,
it
bang.
just a second before.
Bang.
Yeah, but you're right. Civil War and Revolutionary, any like black powder movies drive me nuts with the sound. Master and Commander was good because they did what you guys did, and they took period cannon out to a range. They set up like a faux side of a ship, a hull of a ship, and just shot into it.
Hit the wood.
Yeah, and I love that. But I don't know. I just love that. To me, the visual can be whatever, but you get that sound right, and that's what gets me to the core.
It creates it fires the imagination, and you can see things that aren't really there, but the sound is telling you what's
right. Yeah, no, it's really good stuff. It's so innovative, and it's I just noticed from that moment on, when Ryan came out, every war movie tried to be it, and some came close, but not too many.
The brilliant sound thing, and I didn't realize it. Spielberg told me he was going to do it, and I got to thinking about it, and what it is essentially is how when Tom's character, Captain Miller, submerges, dead silence because he's underwater. You can't hear a thing.
Yeah.
And then when he reemerges, you get whacked with that sound again. That was brilliant.
It was brilliant. And it's not only just the sound's back on, it's like a whoosh as the water clears your ear.
Coming out of your ears.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. He's the best. You can't beat him. He's fantastic. I've enjoyed watching interviews with you for the last day and a half, because and again, it had to be Ryan. When I saw like a behind the scenes thing, that's the first time I'd heard of you. And I thought the actor boot camp was the coolest idea. And I was like, that's why this movie is so good, because these guys went through it. It's sort of, they went through something where they have an idea, and a good actor can fill in the rest, right? Yeah. But I just that's such a brilliant idea that you went and did that. Thank God you did that. I really think because you de-romanticized war for me, and I'm so glad of that, because
the guy was asking me the other day. He said, "Look, if you died tomorrow, what would your legacy be? What would your?" I said, "Look, as far as I'm concerned, the epitaph that would be most rewarding to me is simply he changed the way Hollywood makes war movies."
Yeah.
And if I did that, then good on me.
I agree. Honestly, the way I look at it is, unfortunately, good or bad, whatever, most people get their history from movies.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Or at least the spark is lit from a movie.
Yeah.
And a war movie, I get why they did it in the 40s and the 50s and, during the Cold War and World War II and all that stuff. I get why they did the hurrah stuff and all of that for political purposes or propaganda purposes. But I'm glad that hippie generation got into realism, because I think war is one thing that is just so heartbreaking and horrendous. And I don't care what anybody tells me, maybe I care what you tell me if I'm wrong here, but my theory is, putting myself in a soldier's shoes, is the first time, either the first time a bullet is fired at him in anger, or he sees his buddy die, or he takes a life, he dies. A part of him dies. He's not that kid who went into basic.
Yeah.
And he'll never be that person again.
That's right.
No matter how well he does in civilian life. I mean, I remember my grandfather, he was in World War II, and he told me that he came home, the war was over, and he spent the first 7 days locked in his room, and he would only come down for dinner. He said, didn't even shower, just stayed locked in his room. And his sister and mother were like, Jackie, come on, come out with us, everything. He's just, no. And in that, I said, well, what'd you do for 7 days? And he goes, I thought, what the hell did I just go through? And he goes, because you're not thinking about it when you're in it. You just it's do or die. You got to do it. But when I finally was back home, I didn't feel like I was home. I didn't feel like I was me. I didn't feel anything. And I was just like, what the hell did I just go through? And then finally by day 7, he said, I go, well, whatever I went through it. It's in the past. I am 30 years old. I have a whole life ahead of me.
Yeah.
Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
And he did. But there's other guys who came back and they lost themselves in the bottom of a bottle or whatever the case may be, and they never were able to.
Yeah, it's a, in my own case, there's about 10 years after my war when you and I wouldn't be talking. I had no time for any scum-sucking civilian. I mean, I was angry.
Yeah.
Because nobody got it. Nobody but another veteran. And so I just isolated myself on base and stayed there.
Yeah.
10 years I went through that.
Because, so you were in Vietnam. How many tours did you have in Vietnam? 3 tours. Yeah. 1 Purple Heart per
3
tour?
Purple Hearts.
So right, but 3, but it was one per tour?
No, 68 was a really bad year. There were 2 in that year.
Okay.
And then the last one in early 70.
So the first one how bad were they? Were they
bad enough?
Bad enough that you got a Purple Heart. Yeah. And you went back.
Sure.
So
look, here's the explanation. I've thought about this for 50 years. Why in the hell did I keep going back when I didn't have to and when everybody else was scrambling not to do a repeat performance? And it occurred to me that the real reason, there are 2 real reasons. The first one was because, in retrospect, I considered myself a pro.
Okay.
I'm a professional.
Okay.
And, professionals got to play. They want to play. I don't want to be on a bench. I want to be in the game.
Yeah, I get it.
So that affected me. And along with that came a certain feeling that if I went and used my experience, maybe I could keep some people alive who otherwise wouldn't have been. So that occurred to me. And the other thing, and here's one that will probably surprise you. I came to realize that I liked it.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
All right.
That business of living out on the razor's edge, adrenaline-charged razor's edge, made everything else pale by comparison.
I can imagine that, yeah.
And so it was a matter of trying to beat the odds, the decreasing odds of staying alive. It jacked me right up. I was ready to do this.
No, I can understand that. It's like why people go skydiving or bungee jumping. It's that risking life. Except yours was actually risking your life.
And there are moments, because I began to think about this. I mean, I'm not prone to a lot of fuzzy-headed navel gazing, but I am introspective when it comes to the war experience, and I because I have to be. I'm in the business of communicating with people what the combat experience is like.
Right.
And there's a unique experience, I guess, and I call it the come to Jesus moment.
Okay.
And I remember when it happened. What happens is you get into a close combat situation, and a lot of times you're just, you're firing at shadows in the bush, or you see muzzle flash and you shoot at that. And then you get into fights like Way was Tet of 68, where it was close combat. I mean, you were looking in his beady ass eyeballs, and he was looking in yours.
Right.
And that was the first time I'd ever seen a guy that I killed, that I shot, blew him apart. And what happened that evening, I was laying on in some rubble-filled building and looking up at the moon, and I said, "Oh my God, I think I have just doomed myself. I think my soul is gone." And I was brought up, as a Christian kid and went to church and all that sort of thing. The big commandment is thou shalt not kill, and I just did.
Yeah.
And I saw the result of it. No question that I blew that guy away. And you sit there and say, "Oh, Jesus, how am I going to deal with this?" You really reach a crisis of conscience.
Yeah.
And it took me, I didn't say much about it because it sort of embarrassed me. But as I went along and talked to more people and became really intimate friends with people, they would tell me this, "Yeah, I had the same thing. I get it."
Yeah.
And that experience is something that I've often tried to get on film, and I've failed so far because it's so internal, it's so visceral that it's very hard to take a picture of it.
You'd have to show the guy breaking down or something.
Yeah,
you can't.
Because when you do the breakdowns, the combat fatigue sequence, everybody says, "Well, of course, he's been through a lot of dangerous things, and he's very tired and he's exhausted, so he falls over." In many cases, it's because he's suffering that crisis of conscience.
Yeah.
And that's something that is kind of unique to the combat experience. The only other people I've talked to who sort of had to deal with it were police officers, law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
They've shot somebody in the line of duty, and the guy died, and there you are sitting and looking at your handiwork, if you will.
Right.
And so I've talked to policemen who tell me they've had that come to Jesus experience.
I actually once in a while I'll go down a rabbit hole on YouTube and I'll watch cop body cam videos. Yeah. And I have seen a number of them where they've had to shoot somebody and they immediately break down and start crying, and their buddies have to try to buck them up and make sure they're okay. But what I always found to be the strangest is that, law enforcement is different than military, but when they shoot somebody, the first thing they have to do is render aid.
Yeah. It's funny. That's the difference really between the combat experience and the law enforcement experience. That's usually a one-time shootout. It's one guy against another guy. Down he goes, and now you have time to deal with it. To render aid or to break down and all that sort of thing. In combat, you can't do that.
No,
you can't stop. No. You got to keep going.
Because his buddies will shoot you.
Why. And I've talked to guys who tell me that they had to come to Jesus moment, but it was weeks later when their mind got around to reviewing.
Right.
So there's a little bit of difference there.
So when you have that moment, when you've taken your first life that you've taken, is at some point the thought, well, there's no turning back now, I might as well keep going. Like, you know what I'm saying when I say that?
Yeah, I do, and I guess there is some of that, because you're concerned with survival beyond this. This is one thing, and you got to deal with it.
Right.
But you have to push on. You have to get on, and I think your training takes over. If you're well trained, what happens is, okay, I've done this. I'm either doomed or I'm not, but I can't stop and contemplate it, and I got to get on, and that really saves you.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning, not the very beginning, but the beginning of your military career. I think, what were you, 19 when you went in?
Yeah. I was 18.
18.
Yeah.
Okay. So the minute you were able to, you signed up?
Yeah. Originally, I went to a military school, a Missouri Military Academy in Mexico, Missouri, and I was bound and determined to make my military career, even at a very young age. I thought that's what I want to do. But I chased too many girls and played too much sports, and so when I came to take I wanted to go to the Naval Academy at Annapolis, And when it came to taking the exams, I went swirling toward the toilet. I mean, I couldn't handle the engineering and the math all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I took the exam and failed it not only once but twice. And I had that, oh my God, what am I? There's no money for college. You couldn't get loans or scholarships like you can now. And so what am I going to do? What's my life to be here? Am I going to be a farmer? Am I going to work in the AP Green fire brick plant for the rest of my life? Because most of my buddies did.
Right.
And I said, it just isn't right. I can't accept this. And one winter evening, right after Christmas in 1963, I was crying the poor ass, sitting on a curb in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And I happened to be, at the time, right outside of the post office. And it was sleeting and raining, and I was wet, and I was cold, and I was miserable, and I said, my life is over at 18.
Yeah.
And and I looked around, and here was this A sign right outside the post office, and it had this picture of this lantern-jawed, rugged-looking Marine in dress blue uniform. And it just said one word right over the top. It said, "Ready?" And I said, by God, I think I am. And the next day I enlisted.
So when you're at that, but before you're at that point, as you're growing up, you're watching John Wayne movies, you're watching all types of war movies, I'm sure, right? And it just draws you in. What was it about those? And I know this is kind of, like I said, this is in a lot of your interviews, but I want to at least establish this here. So what is it about those movies that got you? And then tell me about what happened once you got in.
Well, look, I think what happened, as I recall it, and it's, at my age, I'm 80 now, it's hard to remember those things. As I recall it, my father used to be a liquor salesman.
Oh, mine was too. And then he had a store.
The best job he could never keep, and because he drank most of what he was supposed to sell. But he would take me around to the bars with him when he was making his deliveries, and I would sit and listen to these old veterans, guys who'd been on Iwo Jima and who'd been at Normandy, and I just, in awe of them. I would sit and look and listen to those stories, and I think that's what lit the spark. I had this vivid imagination as a kid, and I still do. And what happened was I began to see myself in that flag-waving scene, from Mount Suribachi and Iwo Jima, and then I began to consume John Wayne and the movies and all that sort of thing. So,
what's your favorite John Wayne movie?
Your favorite John Wayne movie?
Yeah.
Well, I really like Stagecoach, one of his first ones.
Sure.
And a number of them. I hate the Green Berets.
Yeah, I didn't like that one.
It's a horrible piece of work. A little bovine excrement there. But
was the Sands of Iwo Jima one of the movies that got you wanting to do it?
Sergeant Stryker.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who's ever worn the Marine uniform knows that movie inside and out.
Right.
And it's very easy, once you think of yourself as either wanting to be a Marine or being one, it's very easy to put yourself in the Sergeant Stryker position.
Yeah.
And I did. I certainly did.
Okay, so I derailed you there. I'm sorry. So you were saying you were before the movies, and you were listening to these veterans talking, and you saw yourself in the Iwo Jima pose.
And I think there was just a spark in me, and it fired my imagination. The flint hit the fryzen pan, and suddenly I saw myself in all these situations, and I wanted to be that guy, or I wanted part of that.
What was it about that, though?
I guess it seemed to me that it was purpose.
Okay.
Working in a fire brick plant or, change of truck tires down at the local, there never seemed to be any purpose to that.
Sure.
Everybody else thought it was great. I'll get married and have a couple of kids and I'll work a couple of shifts at the fire brick plant and I'm good. Not me. There was something on the other side of that hill and I wanted to see what the hell it was.
Yeah.
And it was insatiable. It was a drive. I just knew that I could not sit there in southeast Missouri and be happy unless I had seen everything there was to see. And so I embarked on it. And I told myself, look, some way I'm going to see what this is all about. I'm going to see what the throbbing heart of this experience is, not just superficially.
Right.
I want to know what it means viscerally, get down in the gut. And that's what I pursued.
You're like an artist.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
that's an interesting analogy, but
well, no, because you want an artist wants to know everything about life.
Yeah.
Right. They want to know what makes people people. You know, if I'm writing a novel, I need to understand people.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, all my characters are the same. So you are kind of like an artist. You just chose to experience these things and later turned it into art. I mean, you are an artist. You know, you might not think of yourself that way.
That's a compliment, and thank you.
You're welcome.
I think I've always had this vivid imagination. Mm-hmm. You know, I think I hit 12 years old and stopped growing. It was just it, and my imagination would take me places. Mm-hmm. And it
like
does
an
to
artist.
this day. Yeah. I mean, I write books, I make movies. And all of that is painting a picture, and I'm somewhere in that picture, and that's, I almost can't do without that.
Yeah,
I mean, it just is a drive in my life.
Yeah, and so when you get in, what was the first moment where you realized John Wayne's movies are bullshit? What was the first thing that kind of said to you, oh man, this is completely different?
Well, look, I think anybody will tell you the boot camp experience in the Marine Corps is an eye-opener.
Yeah.
And especially in those days because it was brutally physical.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to do that stuff today, but they were then. And you begin to, it's a challenge to that insatiable artistic urge that you have. You say, wait a minute, is it worth this? Can I do without it? And the answer is you can't. But I didn't have it bad in boot camp, but because of my military school experiences, I knew the drill and all that sort of thing. So I very quickly became, a leader, a private leader mm-hmm. in one of the things. So it wasn't a horrible experience for me. And initially, I was assigned as an 81 millimeter mortarman. Frankly, oddly enough, because I understood geometry.
Okay.
And trigonometry, and that's essentially the fire control solution for mortars or indirect fire weapons.
You mean you inherently understood it, or you did well at it in school?
The trig and geometry told me the solution, and I could see it.
Okay, yeah.
And so everybody said, "Oh, this kid's going to be a mortarman," and I did that for a couple of years. But once again, it wasn't scratching my urge. Once I knew how to fire a mortar and how to solve the gunnery solution and for indirect fire and all that sort of thing, I said, okay, now what?
Now what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, through a buddy of mine, I found out that the Marine Corps had a thing called combat correspondent. And if you had a journalism background or if you were creative or you could write a little, hometown newspaper story and do it well, do it in an interesting fashion, you could literally write your own ticket. You could do whatever the hell you wanted to do as long as you could produce the story that was favorable to the Marine Corps or celebrate the kid and that sort of thing. Well, once I found out about that, I said, watch me, and I went after it. And it worked out that way. I mean, they literally, they said, okay. I took a typing test, and I had to rewrite a lead sentence a few times, and I said, well, this kid's good, and I had some high school journalism experience.
Okay.
So they changed my MOS, my military occupational specialty, and I became a combat correspondent. At that point, though, I discovered that in the Marine Corps, and these double handful of these guys throughout the Marine Corps, mm-hmm. And I found out very quickly that when you talk about a Marine Corps combat correspondent, the emphasis is on the first word, combat. Mm. So very shortly thereafter, I found my ass in Southeast Asia, and here we are.
Okay.
But it was great because I got to run with the grunts, and they used to call me Jar. or just another rifle. And that's essentially what I was. But that's where I began to really observe. And what I discovered was that I had an insight. I had a catbird seat to observe the absolute best in human nature and the absolute worst in human nature, right on the firing line, in extremis. Mm-hmm. And I think that finally did it for me. That said, this is so unique. This experience is so unique. And I didn't think about the thousands of other veterans from World War II or Korea. I said, no, this is unique. And so I pursued it, and it always came to me that somehow I had to find a way to paint that picture and let other people who hadn't had that experience know about it.
Yeah.
What good, bad, and indifferent, let them know about it. And that kind of is, the candle that I kept burning for 20 years.
You said the best and the worst of humanity that you witnessed,
yeah.
right? And that's one of the common themes in our show that we try to remind people of, is that, in war, in the middle of a battle here out in Gettysburg, there's stories of, guys just opening each other's skull with the butt of a musket, yeah. And another of enemies giving each other kindness by crawling out into the middle of no man's land to give water to a guy crying for his mother. And everything in between. And it's would you agree that war is human nature in its most extreme?
Well, sure it is. I mean, look, war is hell, and it always will be that way, and there it is. But I think it's important that people understand it, if not from personal experience, understand it viscerally. And by painting pictures of that, we can do that. One of the reasons that I'm so happy and proud to be invited to be an advisor to the board of directors at the Gettysburg Museum of History is simply because they have that similar mission. Mm-hmm. They want to keep history alive,
yep.
Introduce it to people in a very visceral manner. Yep. Because those artifacts and things that you see here at the museum, that's a reminder.
And they're very unique too.
They are unique. They are, and in some ways, there are things you would never see anyplace else.
Absolutely not. No.
And I find that's educational.
I agree.
And by that I mean not so much that it gives you an introduction to history, the history of warfare. Mm-hmm. It certainly does that. But I think it's also a reminder. And this is one of the things that attracts me so much. It's a reminder of what war is really about. Here at the Museum of History, we don't have flags. We have flags with bullet holes and blood stains on them.
Right.
And that sort of thing. Yep. I mean, you just, you see a youngster. I've seen youngsters down in the museum walk in here and look around and see that. Is that blood? Yeah, that's blood. And there's a reason that's blood.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's an invaluable asset and an invaluable mission, I think.
It absolutely is. And the Gettysburg Museum of History, to me, is first of all, it's a very unique place, like we've said, but it's a place that I wish more museums would take a cue from, but at the same time, I'm glad they don't.
Yeah.
Because then if you go and see a museum like this everywhere else, it loses its specialness, right?
Yeah.
But you come here and you're in Gettysburg, and it's not just Civil War artifacts; it's from all over.
Yeah.
And it's amazing all the stuff that he squeezes into that small space.
Yeah, it is. And I'm urging Eric Dorr to spread it out.
Yeah.
And I think he's got plans to do
he
that,
does. He does.
But it's overwhelming. It's so much.
It is. So when you look, going back to Vietnam, and you're a journalist, but at some point you get into just full combat, right? Like you're not a journalist, or are you a journalist throughout Vietnam?
No. Well, yes and no. So the thing about being a Marine Corps combat correspondent, as I said, the emphasis is on the word combat.
Yeah.
And when you get an extremis, you're not sitting back there taking notes and pictures. You're shooting back and getting with it.
Okay.
And you have to do that so that the people with whom you're traveling, the people that you really want to talk to and you really hope will open up to you about their personal experience, if you don't do that, if you don't pull your own weight, if you're just a maggot that's hanging onto the corpse, they'll have nothing to do with you.
Yeah,
and
sure.
we knew that very quickly.
Yeah.
So you had to pull your weight, and often the job was secondary. Well, I need to take some notes here. Well, piss on that, And first of all, I got to deal with this machine gun up here.
Right.
So it was always a balancing act, and sometimes I would come back from a bad combat operation and that sort of thing, and I would say, I don't even know what the hell happened.
Yeah.
I got to make something up here because I got nothing.
Well, so that's okay. So that's something there. You get in a car accident, right? Everything's in slow motion when you remember it, right? Or if you can remember it at all. And I hear that a lot when I hear or read or hear accounts of combat where it's as if everything happened in slow motion, right? But you're not in slow motion, obviously. What do you think that is?
I don't know. It's a form of tunnel vision, I think.
Okay.
Your focus becomes so tight on what's happening around you. Your focus is lost on what's happening around you. Your focus is on what's happening directly in front of you. And
sure.
And I think that tends to make it seem as though the action was slowing down. It's not. It's hot and heavy and furious and going on, and rounds are flying in both directions and tracers are arcing through the sky. And that's happening all across the firing line, if you will. But not to me.
Right.
To me, it's happening. It's this guy and me right here trading shots. And I think that tends to be a slow motion effect with you. One of the most brilliant things that we saw in Saving Private Ryan, for instance, was the 90-degree shutter angle that the director of photography was using. So you could see the shrapnel fly and that sort of thing. Whereas if it was a 45 angle, you'd just miss all that.
A blur.
It's all gone.
Yeah.
And Spielberg did that very deliberately. He wanted that, to slow it down without slowing the frame rate.
Yeah.
And he did.
It was brilliant. And he took the coating off the lenses too, I think. Yeah.
He did.
So when you, okay, so tell me if you will about your first wound.
Okay. The first one was, I was firing, it was in Hue. I was firing cover for a squad that was trying to cross an intersection in the city of Hue, south side of the city of Hue. And I don't know, actually it was on the north side. And because I'm left-handed, I was able to kind of peek around the corner without exposing myself too much and engage this weapon that was firing at the guys who were trying to cross the street. So I was in a cover position. Oh. And unfortunately, I was so focused on suppressing the fire that was coming in, I didn't look off to my left. And off to my left, about 2 stories up, was a sniper.
Ooh.
And he fired at my head, but he hit the receiver of my M16, and it literally exploded. I got the weapon just exploded. It almost tore my thumb off because my thumb was around the pistol grip. That exploded. Pieces of plastic were everywhere, and I had one sliver of plastic that went up under my chin, and it pinned my tongue to the roof of my mouth. I couldn't talk. And so I bleeding all over the place. Head wounds just bleed terribly.
Yeah.
And I staggered back toward the rear, and I was looking for a corpsman, somebody to help me. And I finally found one. He was in a casualty collection point, and he looked at me. I was covered in blood, and he threw me down. And he said, "Where are you hit? Where are you hit?" And he said, "What's the matter?" I said, couldn't talk.
Yeah.
He finally said, "Oh, I see." And he spotted the piece of plastic under my chin. And the bastard reached up and put his boot on my chest and just jerked that piece of plastic out. I exploded all over him.
Oh, God.
And interestingly, one of the things that I will always remember about that incident was this corpsman, Doc Fred Geis was his name, looked at me, and he looked around at the casualties, and we literally just 20, 30 guys full of holes just laying around. And he said, damn, trying to get through this waste city without getting hit is like trying to run between the damn raindrops and not get wet. And I said, whoa, quote that. So the title of my first book is about Vietnam, and it's called Run Between the Raindrops.
Perfect title.
Yeah, that's where that came from.
So you receive that wound, they take you back, patch you up, and everything.
Yeah.
You get. Do you get your Purple Heart right away, or does it come later on?
No, it has to. It's paperwork, and it has to flow through the system, and eventually they show up and hang it on you, and you send it home to mom. Or something.
Right, yeah. Which of course isn't going to worry her, right? You got a Purple Heart, so you receive it. Now, do you have an option after you're hit to be done, or do they?
It depends.
Okay.
If you're badly hit, to the point you're not going to recover in a month or two. They're going to send you.
Sure,
you're gone.
They don't want you.
And if in the days of say 67 to 68, if you were hit 3 times, that was it for you. You've beat your odds.
Okay.
So out you go.
Okay.
So it's 3 purples and a plane ticket, essentially what it was. But I wasn't going to have any part of that, and I was wounded a lot more than that, but I didn't say anything about it.
So you go back. So this wasn't your worst wound.
No, I was hit in the belly and once again in the head that were worse than that one.
Really?
Yeah.
So do you mind talking more about them, or I don't want to.
I don't like to get all gory, but
we don't have to.
Let's. I'll tell you about the torso wound. I went to Vietnam with 1 navel and 1 asshole, and came home with 3 and 2. So you do the math.
Okay, gotcha. We'll leave the wounds alone now. Thank you for that. Okay, so you get the 3 Purple Hearts, and then they send you home, is what you're saying?
And I was going to fight it anyway, but I had been hospitalized, and they wanted to keep me back in the States and that sort of thing, and I said no, I'm not having any of it. And one of the things that convinced me that I needed to go back, they sent me while I was essentially on recovery in the hospital. They sent me on a what's called a casualty call, and I went and assisted an officer who was going to notify a family, and the family was in Georgia, that their son had been killed, and we did that, and God, it was the hardest thing I'd ever. Oh, Jesus! And the mother just went nuts. Mm-hmm. Poor lady, and the dad was trying to be stoic, and the little brothers and sisters were weeping, and I said, I can't do this. I just can't.
Yeah, I couldn't.
I would rather it be me.
Yeah.
And that's what made my decision. I'm going. And
that's got to be the toughest job, being that guy.
Yeah, CACO, Casualty Assistance Contact Officer.
Now, the scene in Private Ryan, when the telegram comes to the mother, is that in any way inspired by that?
Well, I didn't write it.
Well, I
wish I had.
Colored by it.
Both Bob Rodat and Steven Spielberg, I had told that story to. Okay. So I think there was something in that.
Yeah.
And, they did it very well. They didn't dwell. When the car drives up, mm-hmm. and the mother's looking out the window, she knows.
Yeah.
And you don't need to go any further than that. Cut onto the next scene, and you know what's going to happen.
No, that if that doesn't choke you up, I don't know what does. Now, and then, so, okay. You stay in the Marines for, 20 years total?
20 years, yeah.
20 years. You're in Beirut.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
God, I wish we knew. We were put in an absolutely impossible situation. And those of us who'd been in combat, and this was 1982, 83, so there were still a lot of us more senior guys who had been in Vietnam and been in combat. We could see it coming. We could see it walking down the road that we were going to get nailed. Mm. And the problem was we had this impossible mission called presence. Be a presence so that the bad guys will not, raise hell. Well, look, we didn't even know who the bad guys were.
Right.
I mean, we would hear the Marabi Tune is out there raising. What's a
Who the hell are
Marabi
they?
Tune?
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of, Walt Disney cartoon.
Yeah, right.
So we were really badly advised in terms of the threat because we weren't allowed diplomatically to talk to the Israelis or talk to the Lebanese, and who had this intelligence that we could have used.
Yeah.
And then we had the business. There was a diplomatic fear about increasing the U.S. footprint that would make it look as though we were taking sides in an international conflict. And the Brits were under the same problem, and the French were under the same problem, and the Italians were under the same problem. And we couldn't even talk to each other and share that sort of information.
So why be there?
Well, I just because some people are jerks, they just don't get it.
Yeah.
And you can't run a combat situation or a potential combat situation by striped trouser diplomats.
No.
You just can't do that.
No, you're right. Yeah.
They don't get it. And so essentially we were forced to disregard all of the basic infantry stuff, like being on the high ground instead of on the low ground around the airport, about controlling access to your own perimeter, about patrolling outside your own perimeter. We weren't allowed to do that. And we us old salts would get together and look at this as, boy, this is about to turn into a shit sandwich right quick. And here it comes. And in October of 1983, it came. Killed 241 of us. A gas-enhanced truck bomb, essentially.
And were you right there?
No, I had gone. I rotated through a couple of Marine amphibious units, and I stayed there because I thought that was where I should be. But about May, they decided, no, you need to go home. And so I was there from September of 82 through May of 83.
I meant to ask this before, so I want to go back. Now you're of my parents' generation, and the stories, that I heard about how the soldiers were treated when they came back from Vietnam. And even while they were over there, how people back here were working against them, in my estimation, even though they were saying they were working for them.
Yeah.
It doesn't help when you're in country and people are undermining your mission. Did you get any of that when you came home?
Yeah, I did. And look, the old wives' tale about being spit on and all that sort of thing, I didn't get that. But I certainly got protests, and I certainly got people who didn't want to have anything to do with me because I wore a uniform and all that. And that's what I meant. 10 years that went on. It upset me and angered me. And had I encountered these people and said, well, you're full of crap and I'm going to knock that, because I'd have done that and I'd have killed somebody.
Right.
And you don't want that.
No.
That's bad for your career. And so I just isolated myself. And I think over the years, one of the things I've learned is that that bad juju, that horrible feeling in your gut, you got to find a way to get that out. You have to sort of talk about it in some fashion, in some way. If you write about it, if you make motion pictures about it, if you make TV shows about it, you write books, you've got to exorcise those demons.
Yes.
And if you don't, what happens is they sit in there and they poison your system and you become a crotchety old bastard nobody wants to talk about now.
Exactly.
And there were a lot of those.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of those guys. And I think what happened over the years, America recognized that they had confused the war with the warrior. And there was a knee-jerk sort of swing in the other direction. And I think that was a good thing, but it was too late.
Yeah.
And a lot of us had learned to ignore it. We'd learned to live with it. It became like
you mean the
scab.
swing back?
No, the
misery of it all.
the anti-Vietnam situation. We either crawled into the closet and said we were never in Vietnam, even though we were.
Did you do that?
No, okay. No. That would be beyond me. I couldn't do that, but some did. And I think that The problem there is that it took a while to get out of that closet, sometimes years, a decade, until people would say, okay, you guys pissed me off and you hurt me, but I'm going to forgive it. I'm going to forget about it. I'm going to go on with my life, or I'm going to sort of just say, okay, that's you. This is me. Here we go. Yeah. And if there's a good thing that came of that, it's that my generation of veterans who fought in Southeast Asia suddenly became big advocates for the kids who went to Iraq and Saudi Arabia and all that sort of thing. We were the ones who were there sending them off with sage advice and celebrating their service and meeting the airplanes when they came in and, welcome home and all that sort of thing. And that's probably the best thing that came out of it. We learned we took our lumps. Mm-hmm. We got the snot beat out of us psychologically, viscerally. But we said, it'll never happen again. We're not letting this next generation of kids go to an interminable war in the Middle East and have that happen to them when they come home. So we stepped up, I think. Yeah. In my generation of veterans, if we did anything right, and there's some who say we didn't do anything right, but if we did anything right, it was probably that.
You had empathy for them.
Yeah.
So now this is, when you get now to the 80s, when you get into Hollywood, is the attitude towards Vietnam veterans still negative? Because Hollywood's pretty liberal. So how do you...
It just permeated. And look, I knew that the truth of the matter was so much more interesting than the bullshit I was seeing it from the screenwriter, that sort of thing. The problem is when I guess it's not a problem, it's a solution, but when you're ignorant, you can do a lot of things people tell you can't do, and that was certainly my case. I mean, I'd seen every war movie there was, and the common denominator was they pissed me off. So I said, I'm going to fix this. I'll go out to Hollywood, and I'll find the guys who make these movies, and I'll just unscrew their head. And, things aren't done that way in Hollywood. and so I really found myself in a Sisyphean mission, trying to push a rock uphill all the time. And I just wasn't getting any traction. But I was learning some things, how movies are made and all that sort of thing.
But what gave you I understand being pissed that Hollywood's not getting it right. A lot of Americans are pissed that Hollywood doesn't get war movies right, especially if you're a history buff or a veteran. But what is it that makes you, where were you living before you moved to Hollywood?
Well, all over the place, really. I was in Louisiana and Texas and...
But like the last place before you went to California was...
I think it was Houston, Texas.
So you're in Houston, Texas, and you're sitting there and you go, you know what? I think I'm going to go to Hollywood and I'm going to tell them that they need me to advise.
A little more to the story than that. But.
Okay, yeah, but what was the story?
Look, and I've said this before, but it's really true. I was sitting in a Motel 6 in Houston, Texas, out of a job, out of prospects, disgruntled, pissed off, didn't know really what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So I said, all right, I got to figure this out. I'm capable of thinking. I need to figure this out. So I went down to a 7-Eleven, Circle K it may have been in those days, and I bought a yellow legal tablet and a box of crayons and a case of beer.
Of course.
And I went back to the motel, and I said, now I'm going to sit here until I figure out what my assets and what my liabilities are and what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. So I broke out a crayon, and I drew a line down the center of that yellow legal pad, and I wrote assets on one side and liabilities on the other side. And then I started drinking beer. and by about dawn, the beer was gone. And I looked over my notes, and I had something like 15 pages of liabilities and about 3 lines of assets.
Sounds like me.
Yeah. And the upshot was that this business of always being a movie fan, of seeing every military movie there was kind of an asset. And I said, wait a minute. If I get involved in that business, I'll just go out there and I'll change everything and I'll have a great time and go give me a bunch of money and I'll just be famous and wonderful. As I said, it didn't work quite that way. I would go onto movie lots and find the first guy carrying a briefcase and wearing a tie and a costume. Come here, yo. You're a producer. You make war movies where you're screwed up, and here's how I'm going to unscrew you.
Because everybody loves that.
Oh, God.
That's the best approach.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, they'd arrest me and throw me off the lot.
Right.
But I had learned to read the trade papers, Daily Variety and Drama Log and all that sort of thing. And I saw this little blurb in, I think it was Army Orchard's column in Daily Variety, that said a heretofore relatively unknown writer-director by the name of Oliver Stone is going to do this war movie based on his own experience as a combat infantryman in Vietnam. And I said, yes, if anybody's going to know what I'm trying to do here, it'll be Stone.
Yeah.
So through a series of machinations I can't really tell you about because the statute of limitations may not have run out yet, I was able to get a couple of minutes with Stone, and I did my best 3-minute pitch. I said, here's what's wrong with war movies, here's why it's wrong, you know this, I know this, and here's how we fix it. And that was really the genesis of the business of immersive training, prior to any footage being shot at all.
So you didn't have a program yet. This is where you develop the program? Except for being a Marine.
It was in the back of my mind. I knew that if I used the way we train Marines to train actors with certain limitations, that they couldn't miss the message. And so I began to develop that and expand it and come up with how I was going to do this. And one of the things that I did, which is kind of unique to the Captain Dye method, is I would, once a day, and a day was 24 hours. We worked all night ambushes, all that sort of thing. Yeah. I would do a thing called stand down, and usually just before or just after evening chow. And they ate twice a day if they didn't piss me off that day. If they pissed me off, they only ate once. And the stand down was their one opportunity in every day to ask me any question they'd always wondered about. And I said, I don't care how deep you get. I don't care how psychological you get. I don't care what kind of babble you want to come up with. If you've got that question, you need an answer, and I will try to provide that answer. And that turned out to be the magic. They could, the weirdest damn things, they'd think about what they were going to do in the movie, and it was the only time during the day they were allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. And they'd say, he's going to inject me with morphine. How's that done? What's a morphine syringe look like? What does it feel like? And actors are like little dry sponges. If you give them that information, pour that water on it, the sponge expands and becomes useful. And that's really I think was the magic of the whole thing.
I've heard in some of the interviews, actually probably all of the interviews I've watched with you, you said something like you want to get into the soldiers or into the actors. You want them to get into the heart, mind, and guts of a soldier. And I love that term. People usually say heart, mind, and soul, but you said guts, which is pretty good.
And it's because it's set that kind of internal visceral experience that I'm trying to get them to understand. Yeah. Look, you can sit and lecture them all day. You can have dog and pony shows that tell them how to handle a weapon, how to wear their equipment, and that sort of thing. And where does the mud go? And that's all superficial. Right. I wanted to get in their guts. I wanted them to understand that diarrhea churning gut feeling that when the defecation hits the oscillation around you and you're focused here. I wanted them to have some inkling of that. Some inkling of it. And I would often say, I'd pull them aside one-on-one and I'd say, listen, what's the most dangerous thing you've ever done? Well, I fell out of a tree one time and, okay, look, do you remember how terrified you were on the way down? Yeah, I cried. I said, yeah, that's it. And so you teach them that kind of lesson because to be a leader in the military, you really have to be a part-time shrink.
Yeah.
You really have to understand people. Mm-hmm. And I had made a study of this. And each man, each individual, later I started training females, and that was a whole different story, but each individual has a set of buttons, psychological buttons. You got to find those buttons, and they're often very well hidden. Mm-hmm. And then you mash that button. You mash that bastard until he understands what the deal is. And that was really the key to it, I think.
And you're putting them in, like with Platoon, for example, you're out in the bush for like, what, 3 weeks?
3 weeks in the jungle of the Philippines. Yeah.
And you've got guys setting up pyrotechnics, and the actors have no idea that you're about to call in a mortar attack or something like that, right?
Nope, they don't.
And to me, that's, you know what that's like? Hondo, movie Hondo. John Wayne picks the little boy up when he finds out he can't swim and he throws him in the water. Yeah. That's what you're doing there. That's the Hondo method. Yeah. That's what you're doing. So, but I think I've met some actors in my day, and it's amazing to me. Actually, I interviewed Tom Berenger, and he speaks so highly. I was interviewing him about the movie Gettysburg.
Tom's a wonderful
and
guy,
he kept talking about Platoon and you.
Yeah.
He has a lot of respect for you, and a lot of these guys seem to have a lot of respect for you because dare I say, you might be the first time they come close to being a man, right? You know,
I become Uncle Captain.
Yeah.
The Dutch uncle. And you'd be surprised. And what surprised me was how this imprinted on them. I don't know what many of their home lives were difficult, but they would imprint on me. And, 10 years after I'd trained a kid for a certain movie and hadn't heard from him, the phone rings, and it's one of my kids. And he's wondering about a part, and he wants to talk to Uncle Captain about that part. How do I do this?
Yeah.
And that's tremendously gratifying. That's tremendously rewarding.
I would imagine so. And so Platoon, you say that's the first movie, but wasn't there a movie about Martians and Marines?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Well, you brought it up in another interview.
I was trying to figure out how the movie business worked.
Yeah,
and I had this buddy from Vietnam who was a storyboard artist.
Okay,
and he was working for the old Canon Films, a lot of B-movie grindouts. And he said, well, I'm working on this film called Invaders from Mars, which was a remake of a 1952 trash classic. And he said, in this version, the Marines kill the Martians. And I said, well, shit, I got no compunction about killing Martians. Let me go to work on this. And so he got me an introduction to Tobe Hooper, who was the director. A wonderful little curmudgeon. And he said, well, I don't know how Marines go about killing Martians. Well, I do, Toby. Let me do this. And I would create these combat scenes with these fake Martians. And that kind of what it did was I went to school during that production of that film to learn, what does a prop guy do? What's a gaffer? What's a grip? And I learned all that stuff. So I had that. I thought I had the basic school. I just had to find somebody who would let me put it to work. And I found that when I got Stone and Platoon.
But did you go to the local Marine base and
I did, yeah. I threw my Marine card on the table and I talked this reserve officer who was down in Long Beach running a reserve unit. And I talked him into lending me about 50 Marines.
Yeah.
And he made it their duty to come up and report to me on the set. So I had my own company there, and I just ran them through this stuff, and they had a great time.
Sure.
And I said, oh, man, listen, there's something to this. I just have to find the opportunity to show them the way I want to do it.
So that was your pilot program, kind of, just to see if it was worth pursuing any further. School. Yeah. Right, because it was a low-budget film, I'm assuming?
Oh, God, yeah.
Like a no-budget film?
Yeah. I don't know what the hell it was. They didn't pay me anything.
Right. But then, so you go on, so Platoon wins some Oscars, right?
Best Picture, Best Director.
Yeah. So you and Oliver Stone are set, right? It's a skyrocket from that moment on.
His good luck talisman, I think.
Yeah.
And I think I've done 5 pictures with him now. And I just saw him not long ago in Phoenix at another film festival. But
next time you see him, tell him he's one of my favorites. I'm sure he won't care. Please tell him he's one of my favorite directors.
I will.
Yes.
And he's always
and he'll be like, who?
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, and he
is.
He would put me to work when nobody else would, and he's the guy who turned me into an actor.
Yeah.
He said, "Look, you're a natural. The camera loves you, and if you ever take an acting lesson, if you ever go to school, I'll never hire you again." And I said, "Shit, damn. Really?" And he said, "Yep. Absolutely. You do what you do. You be you." And it's the best advice I ever got, really.
So that was the next thing I wanted to get to was you are an actually very good actor. and so there's no lessons there. This is just you.
There's every time I'm on a set, there's lessons. Not formal lessons.
But right, that's what I mean. Yeah.
But I observe. I mean, I'm that consummate observer.
See, that's, again, artist.
And I listen and watch. And I'll see the little things that they'll do, and I said, "Damn, I got to incorporate that. I can use that." So some of the best actors in the world taught me to be an actor. They just didn't know they were doing it.
Yeah, that's so cool. What was the first speaking role you had? It was in Platoon.
To guess it was. Yeah.
And now you have what other roles you've had? Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Colonel Sink in Band of Brothers, which I thought actually was perfect casting. That whole show, but you as Colonel Sink was great. And, again, knowing by that point when that came out, knowing that you're the guy that does the boot camp, and I was like, that's really cool that they put him in the show like that as their commander.
Yeah, it's funny. My reputation precedes and exceeds me, but
sure.
But it really, I've tried throughout my career to find that odd homosexual hairdresser part that,
you can't get it?
I don't get a lot of offers. So, I mean, between me and Lee Ermey, we were the most typecast guy in Hollywood.
Yeah. But we love you guys. I mean, we love seeing you guys in these roles.
I've finally come to realize that, and so I don't bitch about it.
We don't want to see you as the homosexual hairdresser. We want to see you as the Army guy, or that's what I wanted to ask you. So you're a Marine, okay? I can't remember in Platoon, they were Marines?
No, Army.
They were Army. Okay, so then what is the difference in the manual between the Army and the Marines, and is that
there's a world of difference. Look, we've done. I mean, the motto of my company, Warriors Global, is from the Peloponnesian Wars to Star Wars. We'll do it all, and we have done it all.
Yeah, Starship Troopers.
Yeah. But it really takes research, and that's the problem. Most kids who want to do what I do had 4 years in the Army, and that's all they know.
Right.
I've been an inveterate student all my life. I mean, I know how the Navy does things. I know how the Air Force does things, the Coast Guard, the Army, and I know those details, and I study those details. So you have to be a playmaker. You have to know it all.
You have a team, obviously. It's not just you.
Yeah, I mean, look, I run my company, and I run a publishing company, and I hire guys my executive officer has been with me for 50 years. We were young corporals together in Vietnam.
Oh, nice.
And I talked him into becoming my guy.
That's great.
So, I hire some people. Mostly it's piecework because military movies are on a kind of a sine curve. Mm-hmm. You have a bunch of them for a while and then nothing. For 10 years. So you got to find a way to keep busy. So my guys are piecework. I call them in when I need them. And I quickly realized that because of that sine curve, if I'm going to have a successful company, I'm going to need to do something besides movies and television. Mm. So I started doing video games. I started doing themed entertainment for parks, and that's led to some really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how smart it is. It's a matter of survival, I think.
But it's still, some people wouldn't come up with that and they wouldn't survive. Yeah. So, that's very smart.
So you get a phone call from Las Vegas. The Las Vegas Hilton has this ride experience, the Star Trek experience. And they call me and they want me to come up and make the Q video for them and then train the people how to be starship troopers, in the 25th century and that sort of thing.
Right.
So you get weird calls like that, and I love it.
Yeah. So what was do you have a favorite project you worked on? Like one that was just the best experience?
Oh, look, that's got to be Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
The miniseries format, 10 episodes and that sort of thing. You can really deeply get into the story and the characters. So that format is great. I love that. I loved doing Rough Riders with Tom Berenger.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I played Colonel Leonard Wood.
That's right.
The Rough Riders commander.
Yes.
That's a good one. Platoon will always have a close place in my heart because it started my career. Kick-started my career.
Right.
But I think Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, and all of those movies, and I've done an interesting bunch of work with Tom Cruise. I worked with him on Born on the 4th of July, where I got to know me, and I didn't realize it, but Tom really liked me.
Okay.
I wasn't in any mood to be a buddy or anything like that.
Yeah. But you're a Scientologist now.
Yeah, and
No, you're
I'm
not.
and I'm not sure how much Tom is anymore, but but lo and behold, when we started doing Mission Impossible, I found out that Tom wanted me to be one of the agents that chased him across the country, around the globe. And then I get a call one day, and it's Tom's people saying, look, Tom wants you to play his father in a movie called Night and Day. And it turns out I played his dad.
That's awesome.
And, it was. So those relationships are long-lasting.
See, it's always who you know. After the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? After you prove yourself, then it's just who you know. Right? That's how a lot of jobs come about.
Well, yes. But there's so much money involved in making a movie. I mean, $130 million is chump change.
Yeah, I know.
That you do have to campaign for it. You have to, the phone rings usually when they need me, but if I want something, I have to go out and chase it.
But you're legendary. I mean, forgive me for flattering you too much here, but how are people not knocking?
Your mouth to God's ears. Look, I do have a bit of a legendary baggage, I guess.
But that's great.
Bring me Captain Die. He's not about. Well, bring me somebody that looks like Captain Die. No, wait a minute. Bring me somebody that's as big as Captain Die.
Give me a Die type.
Yeah. Bring me a Die type. Right.
What would you say is the acting role that you had that you're most proud of, that you think is your best work?
I guess it would be two things. One was Leonard Wood in Rough Riders. I love that experience. And the other is Colonel Sink in Band of Brothers.
Yeah. Colonel Sink is great. My favorite scene is when, because your relationship with Winters, or Sink's relationship with Winters, I think you and Damian Lewis do it really well.
We understood that relationship.
Yeah. Well, because in boot camp, right, you're in charge of all of them, but he's in charge of them.
And he used every bit of that.
Yeah, which is great. And when in the Foy scene, when you're attacking the village, and he goes, with your voice. Yeah. You just yell at him.
Yeah. And he reacted instantly.
Yeah.
Because he recognized that voice.
There are very fine actors out there, but to put them through the boot camp like you do, I think it shows more in the performance.
Oh, I do.
Because it's almost like a documentary. You're documenting this.
And that's my Oscar.
Yeah.
That's my Academy Award when I see those guys sing out there like that.
Well, Captain Dale Dye, you are someone I've always admired, and this is a true honor and pleasure for me to talk to you. And I do not exaggerate when I say I believe you are a national treasure. I'm so glad that you came here, but I have to
don't say that, because you know what? Eric Dorr is going to put me in the museum down. Let's just stack him up here.
Put you behind plexiglass. Eric Dorr is also here, and I don't want to say goodbye to everybody without acknowledging Eric. Eric, go ahead, sit in front of that mic there, Eric, real quick. Let us know. So Captain Dye alluded to before the fact that he is on your board.
That is correct, and we're really honored and happy to have him on board, and he's already giving me orders and motivating me, and I greatly appreciate that, because we're a little bit behind schedule, so I needed to have someone light me up. And that's what he's doing.
Maybe he needs to put the board through a boot camp so you guys can snap
Hey,
too.
that's a great idea.
No,
Please let me document that. Well, Eric, again, you are once again my hero for the umpteenth time for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, man.
No, thank you. You're very welcome for that compliment, but thank you very much because I love this. This was fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you guys.
Sure.
And thank you all
You're
for
welcome.
watching.
Yep.
Thanks, guys. All right, that was a good
Thanks,
pre-interview. Now let's
Get to the meat. I'm sorry, I gotta go. I'm running out of stuff.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for coming. Okay. Captain, sir, if I may, get you to sign.
Oh my gosh, his hand's gonna fall off.
I know. I'm so sorry. It's the last one.
Let me get over here.
Did you look outside and see the
Bob
lines?
Smith, right?
Yeah.
Is my name?
I hope you enjoyed that amazing interview with Captain Dale Dye. If you want to help the Gettysburg Museum of History expand, you can either go to our website, buy some military antiques, or if you go to the website, there's a section there that says Foundation, and you can donate to the Gettysburg Museum of History Foundation. And there's a link there that you can directly donate, or you can always send in a check, and that would be payable to the Gettysburg Museum of History Foundation. That'll go directly to our Building and Development Fund. Thanks again. Have a great night.